The hall was so still that the torches could be heard breathing. 10 women stood in a perfect line before the dais of Iron Spire Keep. They had traveled from the 5 Great Pack territories, each one chosen, polished, and positioned by families who had spent generations preparing for this moment. Their gowns were immaculate. Their posture was rehearsed. Their futures, they had been told, were already arranged. Alpha King Oscar Peterson entered without ceremony. He did not look at the matchmaker's ledger. He moved through the hall the way a man moves when he is searching for something specific, and already knows it is not where everyone expects it to be. He passed the first woman, the second. The third dipped into a low curtsy, and he did not pause. By the 7th, the room had grown so tense that Lord Voss had pressed his hand flat against the stone wall, as if bracing for impact. Oscar stopped, not in front of any of the 10. He was looking past them, past the banners, past the firelight, at the far corner of the hall, where a young woman sat on a low stool, her back slightly turned, quietly stitching a torn hem she had been working on before the king walked in, and forgot to leave. She had not been presented. She was not on any list. When the silence became too heavy, she looked up, and found the Alpha King staring directly at her. He said 4 words, "Give me the one they call useless." Nobody moved. The matchmaker dropped her pen, and, in that single moment, 10 carefully arranged futures cracked open like bone. Quick pause. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. I have a lot more coming. Chapter 1. Lord Voss moved first. He was a broad man, with the particular build of someone who had once been powerful, and had since settled into a territory that preferred authority to muscle. He stepped forward from his position near the eastern pillar. 3 daughters in the line, 3 political alliances ready to be sealed. And his voice came out with the careful, deliberate smoothness of a man buying himself time to think. "Your Grace." He bowed, briefly, correctly, and then did not stop talking. "Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. The ceremony was arranged for formal presentation. Cecily is my wife's niece. She is here in a supporting capacity. Her role today was—" I know what her role was. Oscar's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You may finish." Lord Voss blinked. He had not expected to be invited to continue. The invitation felt like a trap, or the particular courtesy a king extends when he has already decided something, and is merely allowing the room to exhaust itself. Lord Voss swallowed, and listed, in careful order, the qualities of his eldest daughter Ragna, her lineage, her education, her command of 2 languages, the favorable terms of the alliance her family could offer. Then his second daughter, Astrid. Then his third. He was thorough. He had rehearsed. Oscar waited for him to finish. The hall waited with him, the torches flickering once in a draft from the upper corridor. "Thank you," the king said. And then he turned and looked at the corner and said, "Where are you from?" Cecily Hagen had not moved from her stool, because moving had felt, in the first few seconds, more conspicuous than staying still. She set down the needle. She had run through a thorough inventory of her options, and found all of them inadequate. The dress she was mending belonged to Ragna Voss. The stool she was sitting on had been pulled from a storage alcove by the head servant. The pins at her wrist were her own, which was, in the current moment, the only thing she could say with certainty that she actually owned. She stood. She was not short, but she was not tall. And beside the architectural grandeur of the hall and the assembled line of noble daughters in their immaculate silk, she was aware that she presented something considerably less formal than the occasion demanded. Her dress was clean and well kept, but it was not a presentation gown. Her hair was practical. She had a thread snag on her left sleeve that she had meant to deal with before things became complicated. "Cecily Hagen," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her slightly. "From the Hagen estate at the eastern border of Vosmark territory. I believe there may be a misunderstanding, Your Grace. I was not presented today. I am here because my aunt required an extra pair of hands for the preparation. I carry pins." Oscar looked at her with the complete, unhurried attention of a man confirming something he already believed.
"Clear the room," he said.
The room did not immediately clear. There was a suspended moment, collective and fractured, in which everyone who had spent weeks preparing for this ceremony processed the instruction, and found it contrary to every arrangement they had made. Lady Ingrid Solberg, 3 women down the line, went very still, radiating a specific, composed fury that had not yet found its shape. Mr. Stahl, the matchmaker, who had traveled 4 days on poor roads, pressed forward. "Your Grace," Mr. Stahl said, in the voice she used when she intended to be heard. "Propriety requires. You will remain," Oscar said, "as chaperone." Yes.
Certainly."
Everyone else went. The process took longer than the instruction implied. Fathers guided daughters. Servants carried items. Lord Voss left last, with the deliberate slowness of a man communicating displeasure through the architecture of his exit. The great doors of Iron Spire Keep's hall swung shut, and the sound of them closing was like a judgment. The hall was left to 3 people: the king, the matchmaker, and a woman with needle and thread. Mistress Stahl positioned herself near the far pillar, holding her ledger with both hands, looking at the wall with the studied neutrality of someone who intended to hear everything, and would later claim she had been entirely uninvolved. Oscar had not moved from where he stood. "I saw you at the Vosmark Border Assembly," he said, 8 months ago. A spooked horse broke from its handler. 3 lords stepped back. You stepped forward. Cecily said nothing. My man was there. He filed a report. He described the incident. He noted that the person who moved toward the horse, while everyone else was moving away, was a young woman from the Hagen estate. He described her as the only person present who moved toward the problem instead of away from it. The horse was headed toward the merchant's table, Cecily said. It seemed easier to redirect it than to explain to the merchants why their table had been destroyed. Practical, Oscar said. There was something in the word that was not quite a smile, but was in the family of one. Today, 2 women near the back of the presentation line used a different description. I found the contrast interesting. I wanted to know which description was accurate. She looked at him, at the dark iron of his crown, unadorned, worn like weight rather than symbol, at the fur dark cloak across his shoulders, at the face beneath it, which was considerably more human than she had expected. You could ask the lords who attended the assembly, she said. They were there. They stepped back. She had nothing to say to that. 3 days, Oscar said. That is what I am proposing. 3 days of honest conversation. Not announced. Not arranged for ceremony. At the end of it, I determine whether what I believe I know about you is real. He let that settle.
No obligations.
Nothing performed. And if at the end of 3 days your assessment is that the preferred description was incorrect, then I will tell you so plainly, and you will leave Iron Spire Keep without any public account of what occurred. No record of having been considered. She had conditions of her own. She had not expected to have them. But the part of her that had been standing in corners and reading rooms since she was old enough to understand that corners were where the real information lived, had already assembled them. No announcements until something is definitive, she said. My aunt is not to know the nature of these conversations until there is something concrete to tell her. If this ends before it begins, I leave quietly. And it is not spoken of. Agreed. And I would like it noted, she said, that I still believe this is a misunderstanding. Noted, Oscar said. It is not. He almost smiled. Not quite. A near thing, visible at the edges of his expression for a moment, and then settled back into composure. And Cecily Hagan, who had come to Iron Spire, keep to carry bags and fix hems and stay invisible, looked at the most powerful alpha in 3 centuries, and made the only decision she could trace a clear logic to. She almost trusted it. She picked up her needle and thread from the stool. She turned toward the side door. Tomorrow morning, she said. Without looking back, behind her, the fire moved in the hearth. The matchmaker, at her pillar, wrote something carefully in her ledger, and said nothing at all. Chapter 2. She told herself she was just taking a walk. She was clearly a poor liar. The east courtyard of Iron Spire, Keep at Dawn, was silent and covered in frost. The torches still burned from the night before, their light fading under the pale gray morning. Cecily had told herself, in the corridor, on the stairs, crossing the main hall with her shawl pulled tight, that she was only stretching her legs, that she just happened to walk east. And if the king wasn't there, she would keep walking, and that would be the end of it. He was already there. No crown, no armor. Just a cup of something warm, steam rising into the cold air. He stood by the stone wall, like a man who had been awake for a long time, and had already made peace with it. He wasn't really looking at the wall. He was somewhere else, lost in thought. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and suddenly, he looked more like a man than a king. She noticed it, and immediately ignored it. You're early, he said. So are you, she replied. Not original, but it was all she had that early in the morning. He handed her a second cup. She hadn't noticed it before. She took it because it was cold, and the cup was warm, and refusing it would have required more effort than she had. They stood side by side. The courtyard was empty. The torches flickered once, then steadied. I want to ask you something, she said. And I want the truth, not the polished version. He turned toward her, fully, listening. Lady Astrid Lund, she said. Your last betrothal. There are 4 different stories about why it ended. I want the real one. He didn't answer immediately. Not uncomfortable, just thinking. Astrid said, I wasn't present, he said at last. I attended everything, did everything right. I was always where I was supposed to be. A pause. But she said she wasn't engaged to a person. She was engaged to a role, to a title. His voice stayed steady. She said the man she was meant to marry was somewhere behind all of that, and she couldn't find him, because he wasn't trying to be found. He said it simply, like a report. Cecily let the words settle. Was she wrong? He looked down at his cup. No. Silence. Cold air. Breath visible between them. I became alpha at 23, he said. My father died suddenly. A small pause. I had to become something else. Reliable. Controlled. Unshakable. He looked at his hands. I don't know anymore. If that's who I am. Or just something I practiced too long. Cecily studied him, then spoke. I don't think it's who you are.
No hesitación.
No one asked you to be anything else, so you became what they needed. A breath. That's not character. Another pause. That's adaptation. Silence. He looked at her for a long time. You do that naturally, he said. Do what? Say the truth, without checking if it will hurt. She tilted her head slightly. Would it be better if I checked? He almost smiled.
No.
A quiet beat. No, it wouldn't. The light began to change. The gray lifting slowly, touching the stone wall first.
3 days, she said.
She set her cup down, turned away. Tomorrow morning. She walked across the courtyard, without looking back. But just before she reached the passage, she heard it. A slow exhale, quiet, like a man, letting go of something he didn't realize he was holding. She kept walking, and didn't let herself think
about what that meant.
Chapter 3. Breakfast at Iron Spire Keep was a performance. The table in the great dining hall could seat 40 and currently seated 14. The remaining noble families who had stayed after the disruption of the ceremony. The matchmaker. 2 of Oscar's council members who had arrived the previous evening. And the Voss family in their various configurations of grievance and calculation. Lady Ingrid Solberg presided over her end of the table like a woman who had already won, and was waiting for the acknowledgement to arrive. She was, Cecily had to admit, extremely good at it. Ingrid addressed Cecily at the midpoint of the meal, in the way a woman addresses someone she has already categorized. Her voice was warm, musical, calibrated to carry just far enough to be heard by everyone at the table without appearing to perform. It must be quite different for you, Ingrid said pleasantly. All of this. Iron Spire Keep is very grand, is it not? Different from what you are used to, I imagine. A small territory like yours. The table shifted. A very small shift. The kind that happens when people are watching something without wanting to appear to be watching it. Cecily looked at her. She looked at her the way she had learned to look at things in corners. Fully. Without flinching. Without giving anything away. I have always found, she said, that the size of a place has very little to do with how much happens in it. The room went very quiet. Ingrid smiled. It was a perfect smile. She turned to the council member on her left and said something charming about the Northern Territory's winter trade routes. And the moment moved on, and Cecily picked up her fork and resumed eating as though nothing had occurred. Maya, 2 seats to her left, pressed her knee under the table. Cecily did not react. That afternoon, a rider arrived at the gates at urgency pace. Behind him came Lord Eric Holst. He was 40 years old, slight, with the kind of pleasant, unremarkable features that made people underestimate how much he was paying attention. He arrived under the guise of a courtesy visit. Lady Ingrid's cousin, passing through the Northern Territories, delighted to call in on his dear relation during her stay at Iron Spire Keep. The gateman accepted this. The steward accepted this. The people in the hall who watched him arrive and assessed the urgency of the rider who preceded him by 8 minutes drew their own conclusions, and kept those conclusions to themselves. Cecily was in the Eastern Solar reading when she heard the arrival. She did not go to the window. She went back to her page, and she counted the minutes, and she thought about Lord Eric Holst, whose name she knew, because the name of Ingrid Solberg's cousin who found ruinous information for a living was not obscure to anyone who had spent time in rooms where people talked carefully. She met him at the late afternoon gathering in the main hall, when the families assembled before the evening meal for the particular theater of informal socialization. He was working the room, the way skilled men work rooms. A word here, a question there, moving in arcs that looked random and were not. He reached her at the far end of the room, near the fireplace, and introduced himself with a smile that was entirely pleasant, and eyes that were doing something else entirely. "Miss Hagen," he said. "Delightful. I understand the ceremony took an unexpected turn yesterday." "It did," she agreed. "These things happen," he said warmly. "Choosing ceremonies are unpredictable events." His Grace clearly follows his instincts. A beat. "How are you finding the keep?" "Very comfortable," she said. "And yourself? How was your journey?" "Good roads, mostly. I came through the Eastern Pass." "Beautiful country, that." "Vosmark border territory. Do you know it well?" "I grew up there," she said. "Lovely," he said. "I noticed, actually, in some of the administrative records I came across in my travels, a land dispute near the Hagen family property. An unresolved boundary question. These things drag on sometimes, do they not?" He said it lightly. The way a man drops something deliberately and waits to see exactly how it lands. "I do hope it resolves itself cleanly." Cecily's expression did not change. Not one element of it. "Land disputes are common in border territories," she said pleasantly. "I imagine you encountered several in your travels. This one, I recall, was not quite resolved." He smiled. "But I am sure it will be. These things usually are." He excused himself with a small bow and crossed the room to Ingrid, who was watching from the far wall with the composure of a woman whose peace has just been moved. Cecily remained by the fireplace for exactly the amount of time it takes to finish a cup of wine unhurriedly. Then she set the cup down and went to find Maya. She found her cousin in the second-floor corridor, and Maya, who had inherited their grandmother's particular gift for reading the temperature of her room, took one look at her face and pulled her into the alcove behind the tapestry without being asked. "What was that?" Maya breathed. "He knows about the debt," Cecily said quietly. "The mortgage on the Eastern Field. He knows about it. And he arrived here within 8 hours of the ceremony, which means Ingrid sent for him last night." She paused. "And he has had since this morning to find out what else there is to know." Maya stared at her. "What do we do?" Cecily looked at the tapestry. It depicted a hunting scene. A king on horseback. A stag disappearing into the tree-line. Dogs at the flanks. It was several hundred years old and had a repair in the lower left corner that did not quite match the original weave. "I moved toward the problem," she said, "like I always do." Chapter 4. She did not sleep. She lay on the narrow bed in the guest chamber she had been given. Not the grand rooms assigned to the noble daughters, but a tidy, clean, stone-walled room near the servants' corridor, which she had been placed in because no one had thought to arrange otherwise, and which she preferred because it was quiet and the window faced east. And she reviewed everything she knew. The Eastern Field. Mortgaged 18 months before her father's death. Against a debt her father had never explained to her. The lender was patient, but not indefinitely patient. The boundary dispute dragged through its second year of legal procedure without resolution. She knew what it looked like. A young woman from a struggling estate, performing need, working her way into a king's proximity for reasons that had nothing to do with honesty. She knew, also, what Lord Eric would make it look like. The difference between those two things. What was true, and what could be constructed from what was true, was the problem she turned over in the dark for 3 hours, before she came to the only conclusion that made sense. Before dawn, she rose and dressed and found Lars. Lars was Oscar's steward. 60. Efficient. with the watchful stillness of a man who had managed the logistics of a keep for decades, and had long since stopped being surprised by anything the keep produced. He was in the kitchen corridor overseeing the morning bread delivery when Cecily found him. "I need 10 minutes with His Grace," she said. "This evening. Not the morning meeting. Tonight, before dinner." Lars looked at her. "I will arrange it," he said. "Is there anything else you require?" "Not yet," she said.
Thank you.
The morning meeting in the East Courtyard still happened. It was shorter, charged with something different from the previous mornings, a kind of forward pressure that both of them could feel without naming. She told him she needed to speak to him privately that evening, and he said he knew, and she started slightly. "Lars told me," he said, "not the substance. Simply that you had requested the meeting." He looked at her. "You have decided to move toward something." "I always do," she said. "I know," he said. And the simplicity of it, the way he said it, as though it was a thing he had already catalogued and found correct, settled somewhere in her chest in a way she did not fully examine until later. That evening, Lars brought her to a private room off the eastern corridor. A study, small and fire-warmed, with books along one wall and maps along the other, and 2 chairs positioned near the hearth as though someone had arranged them for exactly this purpose. Oscar was already there. He stood when she entered, which was not something she had expected, and the unexpectedness of it made her grip the back of the chair briefly before she sat down. She told him everything. She told him plainly, without apology and without decoration, because it was not her failure, and she had decided, somewhere in the dark hours of the night, that she would not present it as one. The Eastern Field, mortgaged before her father's death. The lender's patience approaching its limit. The boundary dispute unresolved, pulling legal resources she did not have. Lord Eric, arriving within 8 hours of the ceremony, referencing the dispute by name within 3 hours of walking through the gates. She told him what it looked like. She told him what it was. "I am telling you this," she said, when she had finished, "because I want the version you hear first to be the true one, not because I am asking you to do anything about it." Oscar was quiet. The fire moved. One of the logs shifted and settled. "My father also left debt," he said. "I spent the first 3 years of my reign untangling it. I do not confuse circumstance with character." She had not expected that. She absorbed it without letting it show on her face. Mostly successfully. "Lord Eric is going to find," Oscar continued, "that the information he has gathered has a shorter shelf life than he was expecting." "You do not need to involve yourself," she said. "That was not what this was. I did not come to you to ask for help. I came to you so that the version you heard first was the true one." "I understand that," he said. He looked at her steadily. "But I am involved." He said it simply, not as a declaration, not with weight or theater, as a statement of fact. The way a man states something that is simply the case and requires no further argument. The fire moved again. Somewhere in the keep, a bell sounded the hour. She looked at him across the hearth, at the steady face, the hands that were not quite still in his lap, and felt, with a clarity that was almost alarming, that she had been right the first morning. He was more like a person than anyone had told her to expect. "All right," she said. "All right," he agreed. She went to dinner and ate without tasting any of it. And across the table, Lord Eric was charming and unhurried, watching everything with his pleasant, pale eyes. And she watched him back, and neither of them looked away first. Chapter 5. Lord Eric was too skilled to stop at one piece of information. Cecily understood this the way she understood most things that mattered. Not from what people said, but from how they moved. He was unhurried at dinner, genial at the evening gathering, asking questions about the northern trade routes and the history of Ironspire Keep with the particular enthusiasm of a man who is entirely comfortable and has no reason to rush. She watched him from across the room and felt the quality of dread that belongs to people who know a storm is coming from a direction they have not yet identified. The Eastern Field Debt was his opening move. Skilled men did not play single moves. Maya found her in the corridor after the evening gathering had dispersed, pulling her sideways into the alcove between the stone pillar and the hanging tapestry of the hunt scene. Her face arranged in the expression she used when she had information she was not sure how to deliver. "I followed him," Maya said, without preamble. "I know," Cecily said, because she had seen Maya's absence and drawn the only sensible conclusion. "He was in the great library this afternoon, before the gathering. He was reading. I could not see all of it. I was at the doorway, and he had his back to me."
Maya paused.
"But I saw a name, your father's name, and beside it, 2 words." She stopped.
"Tell me."
"Trust account," Maya said. "And the name of a bank in the Southern Territories." Cecily's mind went very still. A trust account. She had spent 18 months going through every letter, ledger, and document her father had left behind. She had done it at the kitchen table by candlelight after the servants had gone to bed, because she had not wanted anyone to see the full picture of what remained. She had read through debts and receipts and correspondence and deeds until she knew the estate's finances more thoroughly than her father ever had. There was no trust account. There was no Southern bank. There was not, in anything she had found, a single reference to either. "Are you certain of what you saw?" she asked. "I am certain of the name," Maya said. "I am certain of those 2 words. I saw him write something down." She hesitated. "He was smiling when he wrote it." "What kind of smile?" Maya met her eyes. "The kind he uses when he thinks he has found something that ends a problem." Cecily stood in the alcove with the tapestry at her back and the corridor lamp casting its thin light across the stone floor. And she thought very carefully for a long moment. A trust account, sealed and hidden, that she had never known existed, in the hands of a man whose entire purpose in this keep was to construct a version of her that would make Oscar question everything he thought he knew. She could see, with the cold clarity of someone who had spent years reading rooms from corners, exactly what Eric would do with it. He would not present it as a hidden inheritance. He would present it as concealed assets, as evidence that Cecily Hagen had been performing poverty, manufacturing need, manufacturing royal sympathy, while a trust account sat silent in a Southern bank and she said nothing. A clever construction, because it would be built from something true and would require no fabrication at all. "Why are you telling me this?" Cecily asked. Maya had not always been on her side. The Voss household had its loyalties and its frictions, and Cecily had spent years existing in the space between them. "Because he was smiling like that," Maya said simply. "And I have disliked that smile since I was old enough to understand what it meant." Cecily touched her cousin's arm once, briefly. Then she went to find Lars. She found him in the accounts corridor, and she asked him, calmly, plainly, without explaining more than was necessary, whether a trust account existed in her father's name in any Southern bank. She explained what she had been told, and where the information had come from, and why she needed to know before morning.
Lars listened.
When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "His Grace," Lars said carefully, "asked me this morning to ensure you had whatever you needed during your stay." He met her eyes. "Whatever you needed." Those were his exact words. She understood what he was telling her. "I need this," she said. "I will have an answer by first light," Lars said. She went back to her room and sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark, and looked at the east-facing window where the night sky was clear and sharp and cold. And she thought about her father, quiet, careful, always moving around the full picture, and felt the particular ache of a question she was not yet ready to ask. The night was longer than it should have been. She watched the window until the darkness began, at its very edges, to change. Chapter 6. At first light, Lars found her in the east courtyard. She had been there for 20 minutes already, not from the habit of their early meetings, but because the room had become too small and the waiting had become too loud, and the cold air of the courtyard was at least honest about what it was. He pressed a folded note into her hand without ceremony. She unfolded it and read it once. Then she folded it and read it again. Trust account. Held in the name of Gunnar Hagen. Established 14 years prior. Beneficiary named at account opening.
Cecilia Hagen.
Only daughter. Value at last recorded balance. Considerable. Account sealed, pending legal instruction. Instruction never given. Her father had opened an account for her when she was 8 years old. He had added to it quietly year after year through everything. Through the lean years. Through the mortgage on the eastern field. Through whatever private calculation he was running that had kept him from naming the full picture to anyone, including her. He had died without giving the instruction to release it. He had left it sealed and silent in a southern bank while she spent 2 years piecing together everything else, believing she had nothing, managing a crisis that had a resolution she simply did not know existed. She stood in the courtyard with a note in her hand and looked at the frost on the stone wall, and did not, for a moment, trust herself to do anything else. Then she went to find Oscar. She found him in the stables, not riding, simply standing beside his horse, a large gray called Frost, one hand at the animal's neck, looking at nothing in particular. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the stable floor. His expression shifted when he saw her face. She crossed the stable and handed him the note without speaking. He read it. He was quiet for a long moment. The quiet of a man reading something carefully, not the quiet of a man buying time.
"You did not know," he said. "No."
She had made her voice steady on the walk over. She was grateful that it remained that way. He was protecting me from the weight of the full picture.
It was the only way he knew how.
He thought, I think, that if I knew there was something large to rely on, I would stop learning how to rely on myself. A pause. He was not a complicated man, my father, but he had a complicated kind of love. Oscar folded the note and held it. What does this mean practically? It means the debt resolves. The field is secure without the mortgage. The boundary dispute becomes manageable. With proper legal resources, it concludes within a season. She let out a breath. I spent 2 years managing a crisis that had a solution I simply did not know existed. And what Eric will do with it. She looked at him. He had arrived at it without her having to explain, which she should not have found surprising, and still did. He will not present it as a hidden inheritance, she said. He will present it as concealed assets. Evidence that I have been performing poverty to manufacture royal sympathy. A clever construction, because it requires nothing fabricated. It takes something true and reframes it as deliberate deception. Oscar crossed the stable floor and stood in front of her.
Cecily.
Her name, without the title, without the formal weight, the way he had started to say it in the mornings, in the courtyard, when the torches were still burning from the night, and there was no one to hear them but the cold air and the bare stone wall. She made herself hold his gaze.
I know you did not know, he said.
I have spent 4 days watching how you move. You do not construct situations. Everything about how you have operated this week is the opposite of strategy. You move toward problems. You tell me things before they can be weaponized against you. You correct your own misrepresentations before anyone asks you to. He paused. Eric's version of events requires you to be a kind of person you are not. I do not need a document from the South to know that. She said nothing. She was doing something fairly serious with her expression to keep it from becoming something she would have to explain. I am going to speak to Eric and Ingrid today, Oscar said. Not on your behalf. On my own. Because this is my hall. And what they have been doing in it is something I will not permit to continue. All right, she said. And after I speak to them, I need to speak to you. This evening. Somewhere warm. The ghost of something in his face. Not quite hesitation. Not quite resolution. Something between the two. There is something I want to say. I would like to say it without frost on the ground. She looked at him. At the open, careful face. The face that was, she had come to understand over 4 days of early mornings and honest conversations, not a performance at all. But something that simply needed to be asked to be there before it could show itself. All right, she said again. She walked out of the stable and into the pale morning light, and was very careful, all the way down the corridor and up the stairs and back to her room, about her expression. She was not entirely successful. Chapter 7. Oscar did not raise his voice.
He did not need to.
The meeting took place in the private antechamber off the north corridor. A small, stone-walled room used for matters that required neither ceremony nor audience. Oscar sat behind the table. Lord Eric stood to the left. Lady Ingrid to the right. And the arrangement was so clearly that of a hearing rather than a conversation that neither of them attempted to pretend otherwise. The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. Oscar told them, in the measured voice he used when something was decided and required only communication rather than discussion, that the information gathered about Cecily Hagen had been gathered with the intent to damage her standing in his hall. He said he knew this. He said he wanted them to know he knew it. Lord Eric made the attempt. He was, even now, skilled. The framing smooth. The delivery unhurried. Due diligence, he said. Concern for His Grace's interests. A king's choice in a choosing ceremony had implications for 5-pack territories, and it was simply responsible to ensure that all relevant information was. The relevant information, Oscar said, was given to me by Cecily herself on the night of your arrival. Before dinner was finished, the room went very quiet. Lord Eric absorbed this. She could feel him absorbing it, recalibrating, reconstructing, looking for the new angle. But there was no new angle, because the structure his entire strategy depended on had already been removed. And he was a skilled enough man to understand that immediately. Ingrid had not spoken. She had been still through the entire exchange with the composure of a woman who is waiting to find the right moment. And now the right moment had come and gone, and she let the composure drop. You are making a mistake, she said. Her voice was flat now, stripped of the musical warmth, direct and cold. Whatever impression she has made is a performance. Whatever you believe you have learned about her in 4 days is exactly what she intended you to learn. She held his gaze. You are choosing instability and obscurity over everything this selection was designed to accomplish. Every alliance this ceremony was meant to secure. Oscar looked at her steadily. I have the greatest respect for your family, he said. I have none for the methods used in my hall over the past 3 days. He paused. You are welcome to remain through the end of the week as my guest. Lord Eric will leave today.
The door closed.
In the connecting passage outside, Cecily and Maya had been standing for the last 12 minutes. Cecily was holding a decorative candlestick she had picked up from the hall table without consciously deciding to, and had not yet put down. Maya had both hands pressed over her mouth. They listened to the footsteps, 2 sets moving away, one brisk, one deliberate, a door further along the corridor. Then silence. Maya lowered her hands. He is leaving, she breathed.
Yes.
He told him to leave.
Eric.
He told him to leave today. Maya's voice was the specific pitch of someone trying to whisper at normal volume.
Cecily.
That was necessary, Cecily said.
It was magnificent, Maya said.
That was magnificent. That was the most magnificent thing I have witnessed in my entire. It was necessary, Cecily said again. But she had set the candlestick down on the wall shelf behind her, and both her hands were pressed flat against the stone. And her hands were not entirely steady. And she did not pretend otherwise to Maya, who had been on her side from the beginning and had earned the truth of it. They stood in the passage for another moment. Somewhere in the keep, an ordinary set of footsteps passed along the corridor above. A servant. A guard. Someone going about a morning that had no idea what had just occurred.
What do we do now? Maya asked.
We go to the afternoon gathering, Cecily said. And we behave as though everything is ordinary. Because everything is ordinary. Because ordinary things happened and were handled, and that is the end of them. Right? Maya said. Yes. Ordinary.
Going.
She went. Cecily remained in the passage for another 30 seconds, breathing, recalibrating, and then she went too, and the stone walls of Iron Spire keep resumed their composure, and the afternoon moved on. Chapter 8. Lady Voss gathered her daughters after the morning gathering. The door of her private suite closed, and what happened behind it was, as such conversations generally are, long and tangled and layered with everything that had been accumulating for 4 days without a suitable place to go. Fury at the disruption of the ceremony. Resentment. Particular.
Specific.
The kind that belongs to people who are not accustomed to being surprised. At the fact that the disruption had a face. And the face was Cecily. Conflict between the logic of wanting one of their own chosen and the not entirely suppressible awareness that what Ingrid had done at the breakfast table and what Eric had been sent here to do was not the kind of thing that anyone in the Voss household would choose to be associated with upon reflection. Ragna, the eldest, had not forgiven Cecily and would not for some time. She sat through the gathering that afternoon with the specific, composed disapproval of a woman who had expected a different outcome, and was recalibrating her contempt rather than releasing it. Maya had been on Cecily's side from the first morning and wore this openly, which was either brave or impractical depending on how you looked at it, and was, in Cecily's private estimation, both. It was Sigrid who appeared at Cecily's door that afternoon. Sigrid was the middle daughter.
20.
Precise.
Cool.
Not unkind, exactly, but the kind of person who expressed care through utility rather than warmth, because warmth required a willingness to be seen that she had not yet negotiated with herself. She and Cecily had spent years in the same household without ever quite becoming close, existing in a kind of civil parallel, each one aware of the other, and neither one reaching across the distance. She stood in the doorway with a deep blue evening dress folded over her arm. "You have worn the same dress for 3 days," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact delivered in the tone of someone who has decided a problem exists and has come to address it. It will need to be taken in at the waist. You have 40 minutes. Cecily looked at her.
Come in, she said.
Sigrid came in, set the dress down, opened the kit she had carried under her other arm, and went to work with the swift, unapologetic precision of a woman who was contributing the one thing she had decided to contribute, and would not be thanked for it because thanks were not the point. She pinned. She measured. She took a seam in at the left side and then the right to compensate. She worked in silence, which was not uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of focused work, of two people who did not need to speak because the action itself was the communication. When she finished, she stepped back and looked at Cecily in the blue dress. She said nothing for a moment. She looked at the line of the shoulders, the fall of the skirt, the way the color worked against Cecily's dark hair and warm brown eyes. She gave a single, short nod, the nod of someone completing a professional assessment. And then she gathered her kit and her pins and walked to the door. She paused in the doorway with her back still to the room. You held your ground at breakfast, she said. Against Ingrid. You did not flinch. A pause. I noticed. Then she left, and the door closed quietly behind her. And the trade routes, the boundary lines she knew by name if not always by sight. Books along the shelves with the particular organized disorder of rooms that are used rather than displayed. 2 chairs near the hearth, positioned so that the people sitting in them would be facing each other rather than the fire. Someone had thought about that, she realized. Someone had thought about it and arranged it this way deliberately. Oscar came in 2 minutes later and closed the door. He did not sit across from her. He sat beside her, close enough that the armrests nearly touched, and turned to face her. He was not wearing the formal cloak. He had the look of a man who had made a decision and was in the process of carrying it out, and was committed to not managing the delivery. I am not, he said, a man who does this easily. She waited. I am not built for declarations. I've spent most of my adult life learning to not want things openly, because wanting things openly creates vulnerabilities that have political consequences. And I was 23 when I learned that lesson, and I learned it thoroughly.
He paused.
But I have not said a single thing this week that I did not mean, and I want you to know that. The fire moved in the hearth. She held very still. I am not interested, he said, in finishing this week and returning to what it was before. I am not interested in the end of the 3 days being the end of the thing. I am interested in you, not as a candidate, not as a selection outcome, as a person who walked into this hall to fix a hem, and made everything I thought I had already decided feel worth deciding again from the beginning. She looked at him for a long moment, at the careful, steady face, at the hands in his lap that were not entirely still. I came here believing I was the extra person, she said, the useful one, but not the one who was looked at. She paused, and the pause held the weight of everything she had been not saying for 4 days. Being looked at by you has been the most surprising thing that has ever happened to me, and I have not once wanted to step back from it. Another pause. Not even when it was frightening. And it has frequently been frightening. Oscar reached out and took her hand, carefully, without demanding anything. Simply present. The way he had been present every morning in the East Courtyard. The way he had been present in the stable when she handed him the note and he read it and said her name without the title. The way he had been present for all of it. Steady, and there, and asking for nothing except honesty. She turned her hand and held his back. They sat like that while the fire moved in the hearth and the stone walls held the warmth around them. And the maps on the walls showed the 5 territories in their careful boundaries. And nothing needed to be performed or arranged or managed. The room was exactly what it was. They were exactly who they were. It was enough. Entirely, precisely, completely enough. And she sat in it without shrinking from it for the first time and longer than she could remember. Outside, somewhere in the keep, the last bell of the evening sounded. Neither of them moved. "Tomorrow morning," she said eventually quietly. "Tomorrow morning," he agreed, and his hand was warm around hers. And the fire was warm around them both. And the night moved on outside the stone walls of Iron Spire Keep, unhurried, and entirely indifferent to whatever had just become possible inside them. Chapter 10. The formal announcement was made the following morning in the Great Hall. Oscar stood before the assembled company. The noble families in their various arrangements of expectation and recalculation. Mistress Doll with her ledger held to her chest like a talisman. 2 council members who had arrived 3 days ago and been told very little and had drawn their own conclusions. The Dowager Queen in the chair she had occupied all week with her particular composure. And he said it plainly. He did not preamble. He did not perform. He said what was true in the voice he used when a thing was decided and simply required communication. Cecily stood beside him, in the blue dress, upright, shoulders back, occupying the space she had been told her whole life was not hers. She let it be hers. Maya, to her left, made a sound that was not fully appropriate for the occasion. Ragnar stared at the middle distance with the particular expression of a woman who is revising her understanding of the world and finding the revision inconvenient. Sigrid stood very straight and did not smile, but the architecture of one was present in her face, visible at the edges if you knew how to look for it, which Cecily did. Lady Voss watched from the edge of the room. Her expression was complicated. The kind that does not resolve cleanly. The kind that will take years and conversations and occasion to fully become something she can name. When Cecily passed her on the way out of the hall, her aunt reached out and touched her arm. Briefly, just once, she said under her breath, where only Cecily could hear. Your mother would have been proud. Cecily did not stop walking. She touched her aunt's hand briefly in return, the way you acknowledge something you cannot look at yet. And then she walked on. Outside the great hall, the courtyard of Iron Spire Keep caught the morning light. It was pale and unexpectedly generous after a week of frost. The kind of winter light that arrives without announcement and makes everything it falls on look briefly like something that has been waiting to be seen properly. The bare stone wall of the eastern courtyard, where she had stood every morning with a cup of something warm, and said the true thing without checking first, held the light on its surface and gave it back. On the stone wall, at the base, in the deep crack between 2 of the oldest stones, something green, small, cautious, entirely determined, the first growth of the season, finding its way through the old stone. Oscar stood beside her and looked at the courtyard. I was right, he said quietly. About what? About the corner, he said. About what I saw when I looked there. She turned to him. At the open face. The face that was not managing anything or protecting anything. Not performing reliability or stability or the particular composure of a man who had learned at 23 that wanting things openly was a vulnerability. He was simply present, fully and completely the person inside the role, looking at her without reservation.
So was I, she said.
The trust account in the South was released within the week. The debt on the Eastern field cleared. The boundary dispute, which had dragged for 2 years through legal procedure, resolved with the remarkable efficiency that Lars noted. Dryly tended to occur when one of the parties to a land dispute became betrothed to an alpha king. Cecily's mother arrived at Iron Spire Keep 12 days after receiving the letter. She sat in the entrance hall with her coat still on for 20 full minutes before anyone realized she was there. Too overwhelmed to stand and announce herself. Too moved to manage the moment cleanly. Oscar found her on his way to the stables and sat beside her and talked to her quietly about the Eastern field and the trust account and what resolution would look like in practical terms. By the time Cecily came looking for her mother, she found her with her coat off, drinking tea with the Alpha King, looking like a woman who had arrived in a country she did not expect to recognize, and found that it felt improbably and undeniably like home. The wedding was in the spring, not the distant abstract spring of plans and postponements. The real one, 6 weeks later, because Oscar saw no reason to wait when the decision had been made. And Cecily agreed that waiting was a thing people did when they were uncertain. And she was not uncertain. She had spent 4 days being the most honest she had ever been with another person. And the outcome of that honesty had been this. And she was not the kind of person who, having arrived somewhere true, chose to leave it and come back later. She walked down the aisle of the great hall of Iron Spire Keep in the morning light. The hall that had seen 10 noble-born she-wolves stand in a perfect line. The hall that had seen a king walk past all of them and point at a corner. And she walked through it as its queen. Upright. Present. Taking up exactly the space she was owed. At the far end of the hall, Oscar turned when she appeared. He looked at her the way he had looked at the corner 7 weeks ago. Not searching. Not performing. Not managing. Simply looking. Openly. Directly. Without reservation. At the person walking toward him. At the only person in the room worth looking at. She reached him and held his hand and let the light fall where it would. It fell on everything equally. The old stone walls. The high torches. The bare winter light coming through the upper windows. The people assembled in their careful arrangements. The hall itself. Ancient and indifferent and witness to generations of choice and consequence. And it fell on them. Cecily Hagen had spent years being useful in other people's stories. She had carried bags and fixed hems and stayed in corners and made herself small enough to fit in the spaces no one else wanted. She had been invisible, and she had survived it. And she had never once expected to be seen. This story was hers. She held on to his hand and let the light find them both.
And it was warm. And it was honest.
And it was good. It was more than enough. It was everything.
If you enjoy watching this story, please like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.